The wind came first. It did not howl. It screamed. It tore across the Montana highway, like something alive and hungry, dragging walls of white behind it. Visibility dropped to nothing. The world became a blur of ice and shadow. A line of motorcycles pushed forward through the storm. Their headlights were small and weak against the blizzard. The riders moved in tight formation, each one following the faint glow of the bike ahead. They had been on the road for 6 hours. They should have stopped 2 hours ago. But the next town was close. They could make it. They had to. At the rear of the line, Marcus Dalton gripped his handlebars and tried to feel his fingers. He could not. The cold had crept through his gloves an hour ago. Now it was in his bones. His visor was frosted over. He could barely see the bike in front of him. Every few seconds he wiped the ice away with his left hand. It came back within moments. The others called him Bear. He had earned the name years ago, back when he still believed names meant something. Now it was just a word, a thing people said when they wanted his attention. His radio crackled. Someone up front was asking if they should pull over. Someone else said no. Keep moving. Stopping meant freezing. Stopping meant death. Bear agreed. He kept his head down and pushed forward. Then he saw it, a shape in the snow, off to the right, near the fence line that ran along the highway. It was small, too small to be a deer, too still to be an animal looking for shelter. He blinked, wiped his visor again. The shape was still there. Bear pressed his radio. His voice came out rough and low. He told the others to keep moving. He would catch up. There was a pause on the line. Someone asked if he was sure. He said yes. The formation pulled ahead and disappeared into the white. He guided his bike to the shoulder and killed the engine. The silence hit him like a wall. No wind, no rumble, just the soft hiss of snow falling on his jacket. He swung his leg over the seat and stepped off. His boots sank into snow up to his knees. The cold wrapped around his legs like hands trying to pull him down. He ignored it. He moved toward the shape. It was a child, a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She was curled against a wooden fence post, her arms wrapped tight around her knees. Her face was buried in a jacket that was too thin, far too thin. Her small body shook with tremors that came from somewhere deeper than cold. Bear stopped 3 feet away. He did not move closer. He did not speak. He just watched. The girl lifted her head. Her lips were blue. Her skin was pale gray. Her eyes were wide and empty and looking at something far beyond him. Those eyes had already made peace with what was coming. Those eyes had already said goodbye. She did not run. She did not scream. She simply looked at him, waiting. Bear had seen that look before. Once, a long time ago, on a face he still saw in his dreams. He knelt slowly. The snow pressed against his knees. He did not reach for her. He just placed himself between her body and the wind. He became a wall, a shelter, a thing the cold could not move. The girl watched him. Her breathing was shallow. Her tremors were slowing. That was bad. That meant her body was giving up. Bear spoke softly. He asked her name. She did not answer. He asked if she could hear him. She blinked once, slowly. He looked at her jacket, at her shoes. They were not winter shoes. They were sneakers, thin and worn. The laces were untied. There was no hat, no gloves, no scarf. This was not a child who wandered away from a nearby farmhouse. This was not a child who got lost on a walk. This was a child who had run, a child who had chosen a blizzard over whatever was behind her. Bear felt something shift in his chest, something old and heavy and sharp. He had made a promise once, to a girl with the same eyes. He had broken that promise. He had walked away. He had told himself there was nothing he could do. He was wrong then. He would not be wrong now. He looked at the little girl. He did not smile. He did not make promises he could not keep. He simply nodded once, a silent agreement between them. Then he heard it, faint at first, almost lost in the wind, but growing louder. He turned his head and looked back toward the highway. Through the curtain of falling snow, 2 pale lights appeared. Headlights, moving slowly, searching. Someone else was out here. Someone was looking for something. Bear turned back to the girl. Her eyes had gone wide again. Not with cold this time. With fear. She knew who was coming. The cemetery sat at the edge of town, where the fields began and the fences ended. 3 weeks before the blizzard, a little girl stood alone beside a fresh grave. The dirt was still dark and loose. The headstone was plain gray marble with a name carved deep into the surface. Margaret Ann Hollister. Emma did not cry. She had cried for 3 days straight after her grandmother passed. Now there was nothing left. Her eyes were dry and red and tired. Her hands hung at her sides. The black dress she wore was too big. It had belonged to her grandmother once, decades ago, and someone at the funeral home had pinned it to fit. A man in a long black coat stood a few feet behind her. He was a lawyer. His name was Mr. Randall. He kept checking his watch and looking toward the parking lot. He had somewhere else to be. Emma did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the grave. Margaret Hollister had been the last of her family. She ran the largest cattle ranch in the territory for 60 years. She raised Emma alone after Emma's parents died in a car accident. Emma was 2 years old when it happened. She had no memory of her mother or father. Only photographs. Only stories her grandmother told at night before bed. The ranch was everything. It stretched across 3,000 acres of Montana grassland. There were horses and cattle and a creek that ran through the back pasture. Emma learned to ride before she could read. She learned to mend fences before she learned to tie her shoes. The smell of coffee and hay and old leather was the smell of home. Her grandmother taught her everything. How to check the weather by watching the birds. How to calm a scared horse with just her voice. How to be strong when the world tried to make her small. But Margaret was gone now, and Emma had no one. Mr. Randall cleared his throat. He said they needed to go. There were papers to sign, arrangements to make. Emma nodded but did not move. She reached out and placed her small hand on the cold marble. She whispered something too soft for anyone else to hear. Then she turned and followed the lawyer to his car. The state moved fast. There were no other relatives, no aunts or uncles, no cousins. The Hollister line ended with Emma. A social worker came to the ranch the next day. She was kind, but busy. She explained that Emma could not stay alone. She was only 8 years old. She needed a guardian. The Grays were chosen within the week. Vincent Gray was a tall man with thin lips and a smile that never reached his eyes. His wife, Dolores, was quiet and pale, and always looking at the floor. They lived in a large house on the edge of town. They had no children of their own. Vincent told the social worker he was an old friend of Margaret's. He said he had known the family for years. He said he wanted to help. The social worker smiled and signed the papers. Emma did not remember Vincent. She did not remember ever seeing him at the ranch or hearing his name. But she was exhausted. Her grandmother was gone. She had nowhere else to go. The first few days at the Gray house were quiet. Dolores made meals that Emma barely touched. Vincent stayed in his office most of the time, making phone calls and shuffling papers. Emma stayed in her room, staring at the walls, holding the small gold locket her grandmother had given her on her 7th birthday. Then, one night, Emma woke to voices. She crept to the top of the stairs and listened. Vincent was in the kitchen with another man, a man with a deep voice. They were talking about the ranch, about the land, about money. Emma pressed herself against the wall and held her breath. Vincent said something about inheritance. The other man said something about guardianship. Then Vincent laughed. It was a low, cold sound. He said the words clearly. The girl won't be a problem. Emma's heart stopped. She did not understand everything, but she understood enough. They did not care about her. They never did. They cared about the ranch, about her grandmother's money, about the land that now belonged to Emma. She went back to her room and did not sleep. She lay in the dark and thought about her grandmother, about the ranch, about the way Vincent smiled with his mouth but not his eyes. The next morning before the sun came up, Emma packed a small bag. She took her grandmother's locket and a handful of crackers from the kitchen. She slipped out the back door and did not look back. She walked for 2 days. She hid in ditches when cars passed. She slept in empty barns and sheds. She ate snow when the crackers ran out. On the 3rd day, the blizzard found her. Now, 3 weeks later, the headlights in the distance grew closer. A black SUV moved slowly through the white curtain of snow, scanning the roadside. The driver leaned forward over the wheel, searching. Vincent Gray was not the type to give up, especially when 3,000 acres were at stake. The diner sat at the edge of the highway, its neon sign flickering against the gray morning sky. The parking lot was full of motorcycles, 12 of them, chrome and leather lined up in a row near the entrance. Inside, the iron wolves waited for the storm that was coming. Stitch stood near the back door, helping the waitress carry boxes from her car. She was an older woman with tired eyes and a bad hip. The boxes were heavy, full of canned goods for the pantry. Stitch carried 3 at a time and refused to let her lift anything. Axel sat at the counter, finishing his coffee. A young couple at the next table counted coins to pay their bill. They came up short. Axel slid a 20 across the counter without looking at them. He told the cashier to keep the change. The couple tried to thank him. He just shook his head and went back to his coffee. Tango was on his knees behind the front counter, pulling wires from a small black box. The diner's Wi-Fi had been down for a week. The owner had called 3 repair companies. None of them showed up. Tango had it working in 15 minutes. The world saw leather and tattoos. The world saw men who looked dangerous. But inside this diner, they were just people helping people. That was who the Iron Wolves were. That was who they had always been. They were riding back from a charity event 3 counties over. A toy drive for children in foster care. Every December, the club loaded their bikes with bags of new toys and delivered them in person. They sat with the kids, played games, told stories, made promises to come back. Bear sat alone by the window at the far end of the diner. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago. He did not drink it. He just stared at the sky and watched the clouds thicken. The other members knew to give him space. They all understood. December 14th was not a good day for Bear. It never had been. 25 years ago, on this exact date, his sister disappeared. Her name was Lily. She was 9 years old. Bear was 17. Their family had gone on a camping trip in the mountains. It was supposed to be a simple weekend. Fresh air, pine trees, time away from the noise of the city. On the second morning, Lily walked to the creek to fill a water bottle. Bear was supposed to go with her. He was supposed to watch her. But he stayed behind to argue with his father about something stupid. Something he could not even remember now. When he finally went to find her, she was gone. They searched for 3 days. Every trail, every ravine, every hollow tree and hidden cave. They found nothing. Not a shoe, not a hair ribbon, not a single trace of the little girl with braids and a gap-toothed smile. The police called it an abduction. No body, no suspect, no closure, just silence. Bear joined the army 6 months later. He could not stand feeling helpless, could not stand waking up in a house full of grief and blame. He needed to do something, anything. He became a medic because he needed to save someone. If he could not save Lily, maybe he could save somebody else. Now, 25 years later, he still looked for her. In every crowd, on every sidewalk, in every small town they rode through, he scanned faces the way other people scan their phones, automatically, constantly. Without even knowing he was doing it, he still carried her photo in his wallet, a school picture from 3rd grade. The edges were worn soft from years of handling. The storm rolled in faster than expected. The radio in the corner of the diner crackled with weather warnings. Heavy snow, 0 visibility, stay off the roads. The club gathered near the counter to decide what to do. Some wanted to wait it out, find a motel, let the storm pass. But they had people at home. The weather forecast had been wrong before. If they left now, they could make it. Bear stood up from his table. He pulled on his gloves and walked toward the door. His voice was low and steady. He said they should ride. The others nodded. They trusted him. 20 miles later, the storm swallowed them. Bear saw the shape by the fence. He pulled over. He found the girl. Now he knelt in front of her, blocking the wind with his body. Her eyes were wide with fear. Not fear of him. Fear of something behind him. His radio crackled. Axel's voice cut through the static, rough and urgent. He said there was a vehicle coming up from the rear, black SUV, moving slow. He asked if Bear needed backup. Bear did not answer right away. He looked at the little girl. Her fingers gripped the thin fabric of her jacket. Her whole body had gone stiff. She knew who was in that SUV. She knew. And she was terrified. The headlights grew brighter. 2 pale circles cutting through the wall of white. The SUV moved slowly, deliberately, scanning the roadside like a predator tracking wounded prey. Bear stayed on his knees in front of Emma. He did not turn to look at the approaching vehicle. He kept his eyes on the girl. Her face was pale gray. Her lips had gone from blue to almost purple. The tremors in her small body were slowing down. That meant her core temperature was dropping fast. He spoke for the first time. His voice was low and calm and steady. It was the voice he used with wounded soldiers in the field. The voice that said everything would be okay, even when it might not be. He did not ask what happened. He did not ask where her parents were. He did not ask why she was alone in a blizzard wearing sneakers and a thin jacket. He asked only one question. Do you want to come with me? Emma looked at him. Really looked. Her eyes moved across his face, taking in the details. The thick beard. The leather vest with patches sewn across the chest. The size of him, broad and tall and blocking out the wind. Most people saw danger when they looked at men like him. Most people crossed the street or locked their car doors or pulled their children closer. But Emma saw something else. She saw how he had positioned himself between her and the storm. She saw how he kept his distance, giving her space instead of grabbing her. She saw how he asked instead of demanded. She nodded. Bear moved quickly but carefully. He unzipped his heavy riding jacket and pulled it off his shoulders. The cold hit his chest immediately, biting through his sweater. He did not react. He wrapped the jacket around Emma, covering her from neck to knees. The warmth from his body was still trapped in the lining. He lifted her gently, sliding one arm under her legs and the other behind her back. She weighed almost nothing. Her body was stiff from cold, but she did not resist. She pressed her face against his chest and closed her eyes. The SUV was 200 yards away now, close enough to see the shape of it through the snow. A black vehicle, moving slow, headlights sweeping left and right. Bear could not outrun a car. Not on icy roads. Not with a child. He could not hide either. The terrain was flat and open. Nothing but snow and fence posts for miles. But he could call his brothers. He keyed his radio with one hand, holding Emma steady with the other. His voice was flat and urgent. He said he had a child. Hypothermia. Someone was following her. He needed a wall. 30 seconds passed. The radio crackled with responses. Axel, Stitch, Tango, the others. Their voices were sharp and focused. No questions, no hesitation, just acknowledgement. Then Bear heard them. The rumble of engines behind him, growing louder. Headlights appeared through the white curtain, coming from the opposite direction. 5 motorcycles riding in formation, cutting through the storm. The Iron Wolves turned and spread across the highway. They formed a line, side by side, engines idling, headlights blazing into the blizzard. A wall of chrome and leather and men who did not move for anyone. The SUV stopped. Its headlights flickered once, then held steady. Whoever was inside sat there, watching, waiting. Bear carried Emma to his motorcycle and mounted carefully. He positioned her against his chest, inside the open jacket, her small body pressed against his sweater. He zipped the jacket halfway to hold her in place. Her head rested under his chin. He did not look back. He kicked the engine to life and rode straight toward the wall his brothers had made. They parted just enough to let him through, then closed the gap behind him. The SUV disappeared into the white. Vincent Gray sat behind the wheel, his hands loose on the steering column. His eyes were narrow. His jaw was tight. He watched the bikers hold their position, engines rumbling, exhaust rising into the frozen air. These were not police. These were not social workers. These were unpredictable wild cards. Vincent did not like wild cards. They complicated things. They made simple situations messy. He checked his mirror. The road behind him was clear. He could wait. He could follow at a distance. But not now. Not with witnesses. Not with a dozen men, who clearly had no intention of moving. He turned the SUV around and drove slowly back the way he came. There would be another opportunity. There always was. The girl could not hide forever. Bear rode hard through the storm. One arm wrapped around Emma, the other guiding the handlebars. The wind screamed past them. The snow stung his exposed face. But he did not slow down. Emma shifted against his chest. Her lips moved near his collar. The words were soft, almost lost in the wind. But he heard them. 4 words that changed everything. He said he's family. The old firehouse appeared through the snow like a ghost from another time. Its red brick walls were faded and worn. The garage doors had been replaced with heavy steel. A hand-painted sign above the entrance read Iron Wolves MC. This was Miller's Creek. This was home. Bear pulled his motorcycle into the shelter of the open bay. The other riders followed close behind, engines rumbling against the concrete floor. The warmth hit immediately. Someone had kept the wood stove burning while they were gone. Stitch was off his bike before the engine died. He crossed the floor in 3 long strides and reached Bear just as he was unzipping his jacket. His hands were already moving, checking, assessing. Former paramedic instincts took over without thought. Bear lifted Emma carefully and passed her to Stitch. She did not resist. Her body was limp and her eyes were half closed. The cold had taken too much from her. Stitch carried her to the worn leather couch near the stove and laid her down gently. He pulled back the jacket and checked her fingers first, then her toes, then her ears. His face stayed calm, but his jaw was tight. He said her core temperature was dangerously low. Another hour in that blizzard, and they would have found a body instead of a child. He asked Tango to bring blankets. Dry ones. All of them. The men moved without being told. Axel went to the kitchen to heat water. Another member, whose name was Dutch, brought a first aid kit from the back room. They worked around Emma like a team that had done this before. Because they had. Emma did not speak. She did not cry. She lay beneath the blankets and watched the men around her with eyes that missed nothing. Her gaze moved from face to face, measuring, calculating. This was the quiet assessment of a child who had learned not to trust. A child who had been hurt before. Bear stood a few feet away. Close enough to be seen. Far enough to give her space. He understood that kind of watchfulness. He had worn it himself after Lily disappeared. The constant scanning. The waiting for the next bad thing to happen. Axel pulled out his phone and stepped into the hallway. Bear heard him talking to the county dispatch, reporting a found child, possible hypothermia, requesting medical support if available. A few minutes later, Axel came back into the main room. His face was different now. Harder. He said the sheriff was on the line. She wanted to talk. Bear took the phone and raised it to his ear. The voice on the other end was steady and professional. Sheriff Linda Reyes. She had worked with the Iron Wolves before. She respected them, even if she did not fully understand their world. Bear described the girl, her age, her condition, where he had found her. There was silence on the other end, a long pause that stretched for several seconds. The sheriff spoke slowly. She said the girl was Emma Hollister, Margaret Hollister's granddaughter. She had been missing for 3 days. A search party was out looking for her right now. Half the county was involved. Bear listened without interrupting. He watched Emma across the room. Her eyes were fixed on him. She was listening too. The sheriff continued. She said Emma's temporary guardian had been coordinating the search. A man named Vincent Gray. He had been very concerned, very cooperative. He had called the station every few hours asking for updates. At the sound of that name, something changed. Emma's body went stiff beneath the blankets. Her hands curled into fists. Her eyes dropped to the floor and stayed there. Bear had seen that reaction before. In combat zones. In hospitals. In survivors who could not speak about what happened to them, but whose bodies remembered everything. He turned away from Emma and lowered his voice. He told the sheriff he thought she needed to come here herself. He told her she should not tell Mr. Gray where the girl was. Not yet. There was another pause on the line. Then Sheriff Reyes agreed. She would come alone. She would be there within the hour. Bear ended the call and handed the phone back to Axel. He looked at Emma again. She had not moved. Her small body was still rigid under the blankets. Her eyes were still on the floor. He did not know the full story yet. But he knew enough. He knew the look of a child who had run from something worse than a blizzard. 20 miles away, Vincent Gray sat in his SUV outside a gas station. The storm was letting up. His phone was pressed against his ear. On the other end was a man who owed him favors. A lawyer with connections in the county. A man who could make problems disappear. Vincent spoke calmly. He said there had been a complication. The girl had been found, but not by the right people. He needed to know where she was being held. He needed to get there first. The lawyer said he would make some calls. Vincent thanked him and ended the conversation. He started his engine and pulled back onto the road. The snow was thinning. The hunt was not over. The snow was thinning. Vincent Gray sat in a leather chair across from Harold Finch and waited for solutions. The office was small and plain, tucked behind a real estate agency on the outskirts of the county seat. No name on the door. No secretary at the desk. This was where Finch handled the work that never appeared on invoices. Finch leaned back and tapped his pen against the edge of his desk. He was a thin man with gray hair and glasses that sat too low on his nose. His suit was expensive but wrinkled. He had made a career out of bending rules for people who could afford his rates. Vincent spoke first. He said the girl had been found. But not by the search parties. Not by the volunteers. She had been picked up by a motorcycle gang on the highway. They had taken her to their clubhouse and called the sheriff directly. Finch stopped tapping his pen. His eyes narrowed behind his glasses. He asked which club. Vincent said the Iron Wolves. Out of Miller's Creek. Finch exhaled slowly. He knew the name. Everyone in the county did. They were not the kind of men who backed down from fights. They were not the kind of men who could be bought. Vincent leaned forward in his chair. His voice stayed calm, but his jaw was tight. He had waited 30 years for this. 30 years of watching the Hollister family live on land that should have been his. He was not going to lose it now. The story went back 3 decades. Vincent had been partners with Thomas Hollister in the beginning. They built Hollister Ridge Ranch together, cleared the land, laid the fences, brought in the first herd of cattle. Vincent believed they were equals, brothers in everything but blood. Then Thomas died. A heart attack in the barn on a cold November morning. The will was read 2 weeks later. Everything went to Margaret. The land, the cattle, the house, the accounts. Vincent received nothing. Not a single acre. Not a single dollar. He challenged the will in court. Lost. Challenged again on different grounds. Lost again. Margaret hired her own lawyers. They obtained a restraining order. Vincent was banned from the property. Banned from contacting the family. Pushed out of a life he had helped build. He spent the next 30 years nursing that wound. Watching from a distance. Waiting for his opportunity. It came when he learned Margaret was dying. Cancer. 6 months at most. And there was a granddaughter. A little girl named Emma. The last of the Hollister line. Vincent found Harold Finch through a contact who dealt in rural estate disputes. Finch understood how the system worked. He knew which judges were lazy, which social workers were overloaded, which forms could be filed quickly and which could be delayed for months. The plan was simple. After Margaret died, Vincent would volunteer to foster Emma. He would present himself as an old family friend, concerned, caring, willing to step up when no one else would. Once he had custody, Finch would handle the rest. Legal motions, guardianship petitions, financial conservatorship. Within a year, Vincent would control the ranch. $40 million in land, cattle, and mineral rights. All of it flowing through Emma. All of it managed by him. But Emma heard them talking. That night in the kitchen, she heard Vincent say, "The girl won't be a problem once we control the assets." She heard Finch laugh about how easy it was to work the foster system in counties where nobody asked too many questions. And she ran. Straight into a blizzard. Straight into a frozen death that almost claimed her. Now the plan was falling apart. The bikers had her. The sheriff was asking questions. The timeline was collapsing. Vincent asked Finch what options remained. Legal options. Quick options. Finch removed his glasses and cleaned them with his tie. He spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. He said they could file an emergency custody motion. Claim the child was in danger. Claim she had been taken by dangerous criminals who intended to harm her. Vincent tilted his head. He asked if that would work. Finch nodded. He said people made assumptions about men in leather vests, tattoos, motorcycles. It was easy to paint them as predators. A judge would see a scared little girl being held by a biker gang. The optics were powerful. Vincent smiled for the first time since the storm began. Yes, that could work. Finch picked up his phone and made a call. He spoke in short sentences. Emergency filing, kidnapping, minor child, flight risk. He gave details, names, the address of the Iron Wolves clubhouse. He ended the call and set the phone back on his desk. He told Vincent it was done. The paperwork would be processed tonight. By morning there would be a warrant. Not for Vincent Gray. Not for Harold Finch. For Marcus Dalton. Kidnapping of a minor child. At the county courthouse. A night clerk stamped the filing and added it to the morning docket. She did not read the details. She did not question the urgency. She simply processed the paper and moved on to the next file. By sunrise, Bear would be a wanted man. The fire crackled in the wood stove. Orange light danced across the walls of the wolf den. Outside, the blizzard had passed and left behind a world buried in white silence. Inside, the clubhouse was warm and still. Emma sat on the leather couch wrapped in a thick wool blanket. A bowl of soup rested on the table beside her, half finished. Her color had returned. Her trembling had stopped. Stitch said her temperature was back to normal. Physically, she was stable. But her eyes told a different story. They moved constantly, tracking every person who walked past, every door that opened, every voice that rose above a whisper. She was waiting for something bad to happen. She was always waiting. Bear sat in a worn armchair 10 feet away. A paperback book rested open in his hands. He had not turned a page in 20 minutes. He was not really reading. He was just being present, giving her space to watch him, giving her time to decide if he was safe. He understood this kind of silence. The silence of a child who had learned that words could be weapons, that trust could be a trap, That adults who seemed kind could turn cruel without warning. The other iron wolves moved through the clubhouse on quiet feet. Normally, this space was loud. Music from the old jukebox, arguments about football, laughter that shook the windows. Tonight, none of that. Tonight, every man understood that a child was healing, and healing required stillness. Tango sat at a desk in the corner, his laptop open, the blue glow reflecting off his face. He had been searching for hours. Public records, court filings, property documents, anything connected to the name Hollister. He found something and called Axel over with a low whistle. Axel crossed the room and leaned over his shoulder. They spoke in voices too quiet for Emma to hear. A few minutes later, they approached Bear. Tango carried his laptop. His face was serious. He turned the screen so Bear could see. Margaret Hollister's will had been filed with the county 2 weeks ago. The document was public record, and according to its contents, Emma was not just an heir to the family estate, she was the sole owner. Every acre of Hollister Ridge Ranch, every building, every fence post, every head of cattle, all of it, belonged to an 8-year-old girl. Tango scrolled down to the property assessment. The land alone was valued at over $40 million. Mineral rights added another $12 million. The cattle operation brought in nearly $2 million a year in revenue. Bear stared at the numbers. The pieces fell into place. Vincent Gray did not want Emma. He wanted what Emma owned. He wanted to control her, so he could control the ranch. Axel shook his head slowly. He said it out loud, keeping his voice low. This was never about family. This was about money. $40 million worth. Bear closed the laptop gently. He looked across the room at Emma. She was watching him again. Her eyes were steady and unblinking. She knew they were talking about her. She did not know what they were saying. He held her gaze for a moment, then looked away. He would tell her the truth eventually. But not tonight. Tonight she needed to feel safe. Nothing else mattered. The hours passed. Emma stayed on the couch, but her posture slowly changed. Her shoulders dropped. Her hands unclenched. She stopped tracking every movement and started simply watching. She watched how the men spoke to each other. Rough words, yes. Insults that made no sense to her. But underneath, something different. Respect, loyalty. A kind of care that did not need soft language. She had never seen men behave this way. The men in her life had been distant or dangerous or both. These men were neither. Her eyes drifted to the wall behind Bear's chair. A framed photograph hung there, glass dusty but the image clear. A young girl with brown hair and a wide smile. She looked about Emma's age, maybe a little younger. Beneath the photograph was a missing child poster. Preserved, protected, 25 years old. Emma spoke for the first time in hours. Her voice was soft and uncertain. She asked Bear who the girl was. Bear turned in his chair and looked at the photograph. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but heavy. He said her name was Lily, his sister. She disappeared 25 years ago on a camping trip. They never found her. Not a trace. Not a clue. He had been looking for her ever since. Emma stared at the photograph. At the girl who smiled back from behind the glass. A girl who was lost and never came home. She looked at Bear differently now. Not as a stranger. Not as a man in leather with patches and scars. She saw him as someone who understood. Someone who knew what it meant to lose everything. She pushed the blanket aside and stood slowly. She crossed the distance between them with small, careful steps. Bear did not move. He just watched her come. She stopped beside his chair and reached out. Her small fingers touched the back of his hand. Her voice was barely a whisper. She said she did not want to go back to him. It was the first time she had asked for help. The first time she had trusted anyone since her grandmother died. Sheriff Reyes stepped out of her cruiser and stood in the frozen morning light. The snow from the blizzard covered everything in white. The sky above was pale blue and empty. Her breath formed small clouds that disappeared as fast as they came. She carried 2 cups of coffee from the gas station in town. One black, one with cream and sugar. She did not know how the girl took hers, so she brought both. Axel met her at the door of the wolf den. He nodded once and stepped aside to let her pass. No handshake, no greeting. They both understood this was not a social visit. Inside, the clubhouse was quiet. A few of the iron wolves sat at the bar, watching without speaking. Bear stood near the back wall, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Emma sat on the couch where she had slept, a blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. Reyes crossed the room and set both cups of coffee on the table in front of the girl. She introduced herself, said she was the sheriff, said she was here to listen. Nothing more. A female deputy named Torres had arrived separately. She stood near the door, hands folded, silent. This was procedure. A child interview required a witness. Reyes followed the rules, even when she wanted to break them. Emma looked at the sheriff for a long time. Her eyes moved across the older woman's face, searching for something. Deceit, maybe. Or danger. After a moment, she picked up the cup with cream and sugar. Reyes asked if Emma could tell her what happened at the Gray House. Why she ran. What she heard. Emma spoke slowly. Her voice was soft but steady. She described the night she woke to voices. The kitchen. The two men talking. Vincent, and another man. A lawyer. They spoke about her grandmother's ranch. About money. About guardianship and assets and timelines. Then Vincent said something Emma would never forget. He said she would not be a problem once they controlled everything. The lawyer laughed. He said rural counties made things easy. Emma stopped talking. She stared at the coffee in her hands. She did not cry. She had no tears left. Reyes sat back and let the silence hang for a moment. She knew Vincent Gray. Everyone in the county did. He was a businessman, a church donor, a man who smiled at fundraisers and wrote checks to local charities, the kind of man people trusted without question. But Reyes also knew Margaret Hollister, had known her for 30 years, and Margaret never mentioned Vincent without disgust in her voice. She never explained why, but her instincts were sharper than any court document. Reyes stood and walked to the corner of the room. She pulled out her phone and dialed the county attorney's office. She asked for an immediate review of Vincent Gray's foster placement. She requested a background check on a lawyer named Harold Finch. She wanted financial records, connections, anything that might explain what Emma had heard. The call had barely connected when her radio crackled. Dispatch. Urgent. She answered. The voice on the other end was clipped and professional. A warrant had been issued. Emergency custody order. Signed by Judge Whitmore. At 6 in the morning. The child identified as Emma Hollister was to be removed from the current location and returned to her legal guardian immediately. Reyes asked who the guardian was. The answer came fast. Vincent Gray. She lowered the radio and stood very still. Her jaw was tight. Her hands were steady, but her eyes burned with quiet fury. Harold Finch had filed the motion overnight. He pushed it through a judge known for rubber-stamping emergency orders without reading them. The system had moved faster than she could. She could not ignore a court order. She was the sheriff. The law was the law, even when it was wrong. But she could slow it down. She turned and faced the iron wolves. Her voice was calm but heavy. She told them what was coming. County deputies would arrive within 2 hours to enforce the warrant. She could not stop them. She could not tell anyone to resist. But she could suggest, unofficially, that they might want to consult a lawyer. Someone who knew custody law. Someone fast. Axel was already on his phone before she finished speaking. He stepped outside and started making calls. Tango moved to his laptop and began searching again. Bear did not move. He stayed beside Emma, a wall between her and whatever was coming. Emma watched all of it. She understood. The danger had followed her. It was here, inside this building, wrapped in legal paper and court stamps. Vincent Gray did not need to find her himself. The system would deliver her to him. Tango looked up from his screen. His face had changed. He had found something. Harold Finch had handled 6 estate cases in the past 10 years. Rural families, large properties, children suddenly placed with new guardians. And in every single case, valuable land changed hands within months. Sold, transferred, dissolved. A pattern. A criminal pattern. Clear as daylight. But proving it in court would take weeks, maybe months. And they had less than 2 hours. The clock on the wall showed 90 minutes gone. 30 minutes remained before the deputies would arrive with the warrant. Inside the wolf den, no one spoke. The silence was heavier than the snow that still covered the ground outside. Axel stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. He had been on calls for the past hour. Favors asked. Debts collected. Somewhere in the next county, a lawyer named Diana Reeves was driving as fast as the icy roads would allow. She specialized in custody cases. She worked with veterans. She owed the Iron Wolves nothing. But she came anyway because that was who she was. She would not arrive in time. Everyone knew it. No one said it out loud. Bear sat in his chair near the back of the room. Emma was beside him on the couch, her small body wrapped in the wool blanket she had worn since the night before. She watched the men around her. She listened to their quiet conversations. She understood what was happening even though no one explained it directly. A decision needed to be made. Comply with the warrant or resist. Tango leaned against the bar, his arms folded tight across his chest. He wanted to fight. His whole body said it. Keep the doors locked. Make them force their way in. Give the lawyer time to arrive. But Bear knew what that would mean. Criminal charges for every man in the room. The club's name dragged through the news. And worse, it would give Vincent exactly what he needed. A story. Dangerous bikers holding an innocent child hostage. No court in the state would believe their side after that. Resisting would destroy everything they had built. And it still would not save Emma. Bear looked at the little girl beside him. She was watching his face, reading him the way she had been reading everyone since she arrived, learning who could be trusted, who would tell the truth. He started to speak, but she raised her hand. A small gesture. Quiet. But it stopped him. She said she would go. Her voice was steady. Too steady for a child her age. She told Bear she would not let them destroy their lives for her. She had already lost everyone she loved. Her grandmother. Her home. Her ranch. She would not lose these men too. Not because of her. The room went still. No one moved. No one argued. Bear looked at her for a long moment. He saw something in her eyes that he recognized. The same thing he had carried for 25 years. The weight of deciding to survive when everything inside you wanted to give up. She asked for one thing. Just one. She wanted to wear his jacket when she left. The one with the iron wolf patch on the back. She wanted to remember that she was not alone, that somewhere there were people who stood for her when no one else would. Bear stood slowly. He walked to the hook by the door where his jacket hung. He took it down and carried it back to her. He knelt in front of the couch and held it open. Emma slipped her arms through the sleeves. The jacket hung past her knees. The shoulders dropped below her elbows. She looked small inside it. Absurd and brave and heartbreaking all at once. She pulled it tight around herself and nodded. The sound of engines reached them first, then the crunch of tires on frozen gravel. 2 county cruisers pulled into the lot outside the wolf den and stopped near the entrance. Doors opened. Deputies stepped out. They were local men. Bear recognized their faces from town. They moved slowly, reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with what they had been sent to do. One of them kept his eyes on the ground. The other looked at the clubhouse like he wished he could be anywhere else. The lead deputy knocked once and stepped back. Axel opened the door. The deputy held up the warrant and spoke the words he was required to speak. Emergency custody order. The child known as Emma Hollister was to be released immediately to county supervision and transported to her legal guardian. Bear stepped aside. Emma walked forward on her own, the too large jacket dragging behind her like a cape. She did not cry. She did not beg. She held her head high and walked between the deputies without looking back. They reached the cruiser. One of the deputies opened the rear door. Emma stopped. She turned around and faced the iron wolves. They stood in the doorway of the clubhouse, a line of leather and patches and men who had risked everything for a child they barely knew. Emma raised her right hand and placed her fist over her heart. A wolf salute, the same gesture she had seen them use with each other. Then she climbed into the car. The door closed behind her. The cruiser pulled away and disappeared down the road. 30 seconds later, another car came tearing up the gravel drive. A silver sedan, moving fast, sliding slightly on the ice. It stopped hard in front of the clubhouse. A woman stepped out. Diana Reeves, the lawyer. She was already carrying a stack of documents in her hands. She was too late to stop the transfer, but the papers she held could change everything. 6 cases, 6 estates, a pattern of fraud stretching back a decade. If they could get it in front of the right judge in time. Diana Reeves spread the documents across the table inside the wolf den. Her hands moved fast, sorting pages into stacks, pulling specific files to the front. She had driven 2 hours through icy roads to get here. She was not going to waste a single minute. She explained the situation in short, clear sentences. The warrant that took Emma was pushed through illegally. Harold Finch had no legal standing to file emergency custody on Vincent's behalf. The foster placement was never properly formalized. The paperwork was missing signatures, missing dates, missing the basic requirements that any judge should have noticed. It was fraud, plain and simple. But proving fraud required a hearing, and the county court calendar was backed up. The earliest available slot was 48 hours away. Bear stood by the window, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. 2 days. Emma would be in Vincent's house for 2 days before anyone could intervene. Diana saw the look on his face. She told him she understood. She told him she had seen this before. Children caught in systems that moved too slowly. Predators who knew exactly how to use the law as a weapon. She was already filing emergency motions. Every possible avenue. Every procedural shortcut. She would push until something gave. Sheriff Reyes arrived an hour later. She had made her investigation official, public. She contacted the state attorney general's office and reported suspected fraud in the county foster system. She named Harold Finch. She named Vincent Gray. She put everything on the record. The county could not ignore it now. Too many eyes were watching. By afternoon, the local news had picked up the story. Not because of Emma's inheritance. That detail was still buried in court records. They picked it up because of the bikers. A reporter from the regional station stood outside the Wolf Den with a microphone, telling viewers about the motorcycle club that claimed they rescued a child from a blizzard. A child who was running from her own guardian. The headline made people curious. It made them ask questions. But it also made them suspicious. The footage showed men in leather vests, tattoos, beards, the kind of faces that made some viewers lock their car doors. Vincent Gray understood this perfectly. He called a press conference that evening. He stood on the steps of the county courthouse wearing a gray suit and a tired expression. His voice was soft, measured, full of concern. He told the cameras he was grateful his niece had been found safe. He said the blizzard had been terrifying for everyone involved. He thanked the search volunteers. He thanked the sheriff's department. He thanked God. Then his tone shifted. Just slightly. He expressed concern about the men who had found Emma. He called them rough characters. He said they had held her for hours without contacting proper authorities. He suggested they might have confused her, filled her head with paranoid stories, turned a grieving child against the only family she had left. He dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief. He asked the public for patience. He asked them to let the courts do their job. The Iron Wolves watched the press conference on Tango's laptop. The room was silent. Every man in that clubhouse knew exactly what Vincent was doing. He was painting them as the villains. He was using their appearance against them. He was counting on prejudice to do what his lawyers could not. Axel swore under his breath. Stitch shook his head slowly. Dutch stood near the door with his fists clenched. Bear watched the screen without moving. His face was calm. But behind his eyes, something had shifted. He spoke quietly. He said he would testify at the hearing. He would stand in front of the court and tell them exactly what he saw. A child alone in a blizzard. A child wearing sneakers in the snow. A child whose eyes had already accepted death because whatever she was running from was worse than freezing. He would let them judge him by his words. Not by his jacket. Not by his tattoos. Not by the assumptions they made when they looked at men like him. Diana nodded. She told him she would prep him for testimony. She told him the hearing would be hostile. The opposing lawyer would try to make him look dangerous. Make him look unstable. Make the court believe Emma had been manipulated. Bear said he understood. He had faced worse. But first, Emma had to survive the next 2 days. 48 hours in a house with a man who had already tried to erase her once. A man whose carefully built plan was crumbling. A man who knew that if she testified, everything he had worked for would collapse. Vincent Gray was not the type to give up. He was the type to eliminate problems. And right now, Emma was the only problem standing between him and $40 million. The deputy's cruiser pulled up to the Gray house just before sunset. Emma sat in the back seat, Bear's jacket still wrapped around her small frame. She had not spoken during the entire drive. She had simply watched the road, counting the miles between herself and the only people who had tried to help her. Vincent Gray stood on the front porch, waiting. His face wore the expression of a relieved guardian, concerned, grateful, exhausted from worry. He thanked the deputies for bringing his niece home safely. He shook their hands. He promised to take good care of her. The deputies nodded and drove away. They did not look back. The moment their taillights disappeared down the road, Vincent's expression changed. The warmth drained from his face. His eyes went flat and cold. He looked at Emma the way someone looks at a problem that needs solving. He told her to come inside. His voice was calm, patient, the voice of a man who had all the time in the world. Emma walked past him into the house. She kept her eyes forward. She did not flinch. She did not cry. Vincent closed the door behind them. The lock clicked into place. He did not hurt her. He was too smart for that. Bruises could be photographed. Injuries could be documented. Instead, he used different weapons. Isolation. Silence. Words designed to make her doubt everything she knew. He took the jacket. Said it was dirty. Said bikers carried diseases. He would have it cleaned, he told her. She never saw it again. He led her to a room on the second floor. A guest bedroom with no windows. The door had a lock on the outside. He told her this was for her own safety. She had been through so much. She needed rest. The door closed. The lock turned. Emma sat on the edge of the bed and listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway. The room was clean and plain. White walls, white sheets, a small lamp on the nightstand, nothing else. Hours passed. Vincent came back with food on a tray. Soup and bread. He sat in a chair near the door and watched her eat. He spoke in that same calm, reasonable tone. He told her the bikers were dangerous men. Criminals. They had seen an opportunity and taken it. They wanted to use her for her inheritance. They had filled her head with lies to turn her against her family. Emma said nothing. She ate her soup slowly and kept her eyes on the bowl. He told her the sheriff was corrupt. Everyone in the county knew it. She was working with the bikers because they had paid her off. Nothing she said could be trusted. Emma still said nothing. He told her no one would believe an 8-year-old girl over a respected businessman. He had lived in this county for 30 years. He had built relationships, donated to churches, supported local causes. She was a traumatized child who had been manipulated by strangers. His voice never rose. His face never changed. But his words pressed down on her like stones. Emma had learned something important from her grandmother. She learned that arguing with people like Vincent only gave them power. They fed on conflict. They twisted your words and used them against you. So she stayed quiet. She watched. She waited. She noticed things. A safe in his office, visible through a crack in the door when he walked past. Phone calls at odd hours, his voice low and urgent behind closed walls. A visit from Harold Finch in the middle of the night. The lawyer's car pulling up without headlights. Both men speaking in the kitchen in tones too quiet to hear. But Emma saw Finch's face through the gap under her door. She saw the fear in it. Something had gone wrong. The plan was unraveling. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. A knock on the front door. Vincent answered with his public smile back in place. Sheriff Reyes stood on the porch. She said she was there for a welfare check. Standard procedure for children in emergency custody situations. Vincent could not refuse without raising suspicion. He led her upstairs to Emma's room. Unlocked the door. Let the sheriff inside. Reyes looked around the room. She asked Emma simple questions. Was she eating? Was she sleeping? Did she need anything? Emma answered in single words. Yes. Yes. No. But when Vincent turned to speak to a deputy in the hallway, Reyes moved quickly. She pressed a small folded paper into Emma's palm. Her eyes said everything her voice could not. Then she was gone. Emma waited until the house was silent, until she heard Vincent's footsteps descend the stairs and the television turn on in the living room. Only then did she unfold the paper. 2 more days. Stay strong. We are coming. She read it 3 times. Then she hid it inside her grandmother's locket, pressed against the tiny photograph that had always been there. That night, Emma lay awake in the dark. The house creaked and settled around her. Somewhere below, Vincent was on the phone again. But this time his voice was different. Higher. Faster. The calm was gone. She pressed her ear to the floor and listened. If the hearing goes forward, we lose everything. We need to move her before then. Tango's laptop screen glowed in the dim light of the wolf den. The clubhouse had gone quiet hours ago, but no one was sleeping. Every member sat scattered across the room, waiting for news, waiting for anything that could help. Tango had been monitoring everything he could access. Public flight records, private charter services, credit card activity that left traces in databases most people never knew existed. He worked through the night, following digital threads that Vincent Gray thought were hidden. At 3 in the morning, he found it. A charter flight, booked under a company name linked to Harold Finch. Departure scheduled for 6 the next morning from a private airfield 40 miles outside the county. 1 adult passenger. 1 minor. Tango looked up from his screen. His voice was flat when he spoke. He said Vincent was running, taking Emma out of state before the hearing could happen. By the time the court opened, she would be gone. Bear stood by the window, staring into the darkness. He did not turn around. He asked how long they had. Tango checked the clock on the wall. Less than 8 hours until the plane was scheduled to leave. The court did not open until 9. The hearing was set for 11. Vincent would be airborne 5 hours before anyone could legally stop him. Axel pulled out his phone and called Diana Reeves. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with exhaustion. He explained what Tango had found. She started typing before he finished speaking. Emergency injunction, she said. She could file it electronically, but the courts were closed. Nothing would be processed until the clerks arrived in the morning. The earliest anyone could see it was 8 o'clock. 2 hours after Vincent's plane was scheduled to take off. She would try. She would push. But she could not promise anything. Sheriff Reyes received the same call 20 minutes later. She listened without interrupting. When Axel finished, there was a long silence on the line. She told him her hands were tied. She could not act on speculation. She could not arrest a man for booking a flight. She needed evidence of a crime in progress. And even if she had that evidence, her jurisdiction ended at the county line. Once Vincent crossed into the next county, he was out of her reach. She would have units ready to move the moment she had legal authority. But legal authority might not come in time. Axel ended the call and stood in the center of the room. Every Iron Wolf was watching him. Waiting. He spoke slowly, making sure each man understood. He explained the situation. He explained what they could do. And he explained what it would cost. If they rode out and intercepted Vincent before he reached that airfield, they would be interfering with a custody order. A fraudulent order, yes. An illegal order. But still a court order recognized by the state. Every man who participated could face charges. Obstruction. Contempt. Maybe kidnapping, depending on how the prosecutors wanted to spin it. They could lose everything. Their freedom. Their families. The club itself. Or they could wait. Trust the system. Hope the emergency injunction went through in time. Hope the hearing happened before Vincent disappeared with Emma forever. Axel looked around the room. He asked for a vote. Show of hands. Stitch raised his hand first. Then Tango. Then Dutch. One by one, every member in the room lifted their arm. No hesitation. No discussion needed. They would ride at dawn. Bear stayed up after the others tried to rest. He spread maps across the table and traced routes with his finger. The private airfield sat at the end of a rural road, surrounded by empty fields. One way in, one way out. If they positioned themselves correctly, they could block the road without violence. They could slow Vincent down, create a delay long enough for Reyes to arrive with proper authority, force the system to work the way it was supposed to. This was not about revenge. This was not about taking the law into their own hands. This was about buying time for an 8-year-old girl who had no one else. At 5 in the morning, the Iron Wolves gathered in the parking lot. 20 riders, engines cold from sitting overnight, breath rising in white clouds against the frozen air. Bear mounted his bike at the front of the formation. He pulled on his gloves and gripped the handlebars. The engine roared to life beneath him. Behind him, 19 more engines answered. The sound rolled across the empty streets of Miller's Creek. Windows rattled. Dogs barked in distant yards. The town was still sleeping, but the wolves were awake. Somewhere ahead, Vincent Gray was loading a terrified child into a black SUV. He thought he had won. He thought the system would protect him long enough to escape. He did not know what was coming down the road. Bear signaled with his left hand. The formation began to move. 20 motorcycles rolled out of the lot in perfect order, headlights cutting through the gray dawn. The race had begun. The sun broke over the eastern hills, pale gold light spilling across the frozen fields. The road stretched straight and empty toward the private airfield 2 miles ahead. On both sides, nothing but snow and silence. The Iron Wolves arrived first. 20 motorcycles spread across the pavement in a solid line. Chrome gleamed in the early light. Engines idled low, a steady rumble that vibrated through the ground. The riders sat motionless on their bikes, hands resting on handlebars, faces hidden behind visors and beards. No weapons, no shouting, no aggressive movements, just presence. Just a wall of leather and steel that said one thing clearly: you are not passing through. Bear sat at the center of the formation. His eyes were fixed on the curve in the road ahead, the same curve Vincent Gray would have to round to reach the airfield. The only way in, the only way out. Minutes passed. The cold seeped through jackets and gloves. Breath fogged in the air. Then the SUV appeared. It came around the curve at normal speed. black paint catching the light. The driver saw the wall of motorcycles and hit the brakes hard. Tires slid on the icy pavement. The vehicle stopped 50 yards from the formation. Nothing moved. Bear counted the seconds. 10, 20, 30. The SUV sat there, engine running, windows dark. He could not see inside, but he knew who was there. Vincent Gray behind the wheel. Harold Finch probably beside him. And in the back seat, a little girl who had already survived more than most adults ever faced. Bear dismounted slowly. He pulled off his gloves and tucked them into his belt. He held his hands out from his sides, palms visible, fingers spread. Empty. No threat. He walked toward the SUV. Slow steps. Deliberate pace. His boots crunched on the frozen road. The other Iron Wolves stayed on their bikes. They watched. They waited. When Bear was 20 feet from the SUV, the driver's window rolled down. Vincent Gray's face appeared. He was pale. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved constantly, scanning the road behind him, the motorcycles in front, the fields on either side. He spoke first. His voice cracked with barely controlled rage. He threatened lawyers, lawsuits, criminal charges, federal investigation. He said the Iron Wolves would spend the rest of their lives in prison. He called Bear names. Every word designed to make a man in leather feel small, feel worthless, feel like the criminal Vincent wanted the world to see. Bear did not respond to any of it. He simply looked past Vincent. Through the open window, toward the back seat, Emma was there. She sat pressed against the far door, her body stiff, her hands folded in her lap. She was wearing his jacket, the one with the Iron Wolf patch on the back, the one she had asked for when the deputies came to take her away. Her eyes met his through the glass. They were calm, steady, waiting. Bear spoke clearly, loud enough for Emma to hear every word. He told her she was not alone. He told her they were there. He told her the sheriff was coming. He told her this was almost over. Emma nodded once. A small movement, but it was enough. Vincent understood now. His expression shifted from rage to something colder. Calculation. These men were not here to fight. They were not here to drag him from his vehicle or threaten violence. They were here to wait, to witness, to make sure he could not disappear with a child before the law caught up with him. He checked his mirrors. Behind him, headlights appeared around the curve. One set, then two, then three. Sheriff Reyes' cruiser came first. Behind it, two state police vehicles with lights flashing. And behind those, an unmarked black sedan. The FBI. Diana Reeves' emergency call to federal authorities had finally connected. Interstate child trafficking, taking a minor across state lines to avoid legal proceedings. The cavalry had arrived. Vincent's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His knuckles went white. Harold Finch, sitting in the passenger seat, was already fumbling with his phone, trying to call someone, anyone, who could make this stop. There was no one left to call. The police vehicles stopped in a semicircle behind the SUV. Doors opened. Officers stepped out with hands on their belts. Sheriff Reyes walked forward. Her boots were steady on the icy road. Her face was set with the kind of focus that came from years of waiting for this exact moment. She reached the SUV and stopped beside the driver's door. She looked at Vincent through the window. Her voice was flat and final. She told him to step out of the vehicle. Vincent did not move. Reyes reached down and opened the door herself. It swung wide, letting cold air rush into the cabin. She held up a pair of handcuffs. The metal caught the morning light. "Mr. Gray," she said again. "Step out of the vehicle. Now." The handcuffs clicked shut around Vincent Gray's wrists. The sound was sharp and final in the cold morning air. Sheriff Reyes guided him toward her cruiser while two state troopers secured the scene. Harold Finch sat frozen in the passenger seat, his face the color of old paper, watching his carefully constructed world collapse. Emma stayed in the back of the SUV until a female officer opened the door and knelt beside her. The officer spoke softly. She said Emma was safe now. She said no one would hurt her. She asked if Emma could walk to the warm police car. Emma nodded. She slid out of the seat, Bear's jacket still wrapped around her small frame. She walked past Vincent without looking at him. She did not need to see his face anymore. Bear watched from his position near the motorcycles. He did not approach. He did not speak. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, as Emma was loaded into a cruiser and driven away. The last thing he saw was her face in the rear window, calm and steady, watching him until the car disappeared around the curve. 1 hour later, the FBI arrived at Harold Finch's office. He was standing behind his desk, feeding documents into a shredder as fast as the machine would take them. Paper fragments covered the floor like snow. His secretary stood in the doorway, pale and shaking, unsure what was happening. The agents did not knock. They walked in and told Finch to step away from the machine. He kept feeding paper for 3 more seconds before 2 agents physically moved him. By then, most of the damage was done, but not all of it. Enough files remained to tell the story. The hearing happened on schedule at 11 o'clock. But it was not the hearing anyone had expected. This was no longer about custody. This was about criminal charges. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. Social workers and attorneys crowded the benches. And in the gallery, wearing clean shirts under their leather vests, sat a dozen members of the Iron Wolves MC. Diana Reeves presented the evidence methodically. Finch's files revealed a decade-long pattern of estate fraud. 6 orphaned children, 6 families with valuable land or assets. Each child had been placed with guardians who had financial connections to Finch. Each estate had been liquidated within months. Millions of dollars had disappeared into shell companies and offshore accounts. Vincent Gray was Finch's most ambitious partner. The Hollister estate was the biggest prize they had ever pursued. $40 million in land, cattle, and mineral rights. All of it controlled by an 8-year-old girl who had no one left to protect her. Until now, Emma testified via video link from a secure room in the county building. A child psychologist sat beside her, ready to intervene if the questions became too difficult. But Emma did not need protection. She spoke clearly, calmly, with the precision of a child who had paid attention to every detail because her survival depended on it. She described the night she heard Vincent and Finch talking in the kitchen. She repeated the words exactly. "The girl won't be a problem once we control the assets." She described running into the blizzard. She described the man who found her in the snow, who knelt in front of her and asked if she wanted to come with him instead of grabbing her. The judge listened without interrupting. Her name was Margaret Chen. She was 63 years old. She had 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren. She had been on the bench for 20 years and thought she had seen everything. She had never seen anything like this. When Emma finished her testimony, the judge was silent for a long moment. She removed her glasses and set them on the bench. Her eyes were bright with emotion she did not try to hide. She ruled that Emma's foster placement had been obtained through fraud and was therefore void. She appointed a temporary guardian from Child Protective Services, a woman named Grace Holloway, who had no connection to Vincent Gray or Harold Finch. Then she did something unusual. She paused, looked at the gallery, and spoke directly into the record. She said that Emma's rescue was due to the intervention of citizens who acted with courage and restraint. She named the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club. She thanked them for protecting a child when the system had failed to do so. It was a small moment, a few sentences in a legal transcript. But in the gallery, a dozen men in leather sat straighter in their seats. Some blinked hard. Some looked at the floor. Bear stared at the judge and nodded once. After the hearing, officers escorted Emma through a side corridor. Grace Holloway walked beside her, speaking in gentle tones about what would happen next. Safe placement, counseling, time to heal. Emma stopped walking. She looked up at Grace with those steady, watchful eyes. She asked if she could see them. The wolves. She asked if she could say thank you. The gravel crunched under the tires of Grace Holloway's sedan as it pulled into the lot outside the wolf den. 1 week had passed since the courthouse. 1 week since Vincent Gray and Harold Finch were led away in handcuffs. 1 week since Emma Hollister learned that the world still contained people worth trusting. Inside the clubhouse, the Iron Wolves had transformed their space. Tango pushed a vacuum cleaner across the floor for what he claimed was the first time in his adult life. Stitch arranged grocery store flowers in a mason jar on the bar. Dutch wiped down tables that had not been wiped in months. Axel made a fresh pot of coffee using new filters and beans that did not come from a gas station. Bear stood by the window, watching the sedan approach. He had not slept well in days. His mind kept returning to the same images. A child in the snow, blue lips, eyes that had already accepted the end. He had carried those images for a week the way he had carried his sister's memory for 25 years. The car stopped. Grace stepped out first, then walked around to open the rear door. Emma emerged slowly, looking around at the motorcycles parked in neat rows, at the faded brick building, at the hand-painted sign above the entrance. She was wearing his jacket, the same one she had asked for when the deputies took her away. It still hung past her knees. But she wore it like armor. This was a supervised visit. Documented. Approved by the court. Grace had the paperwork in her bag. Everything proper. Everything legal. The system was finally working the way it should. Emma walked toward the entrance with Grace beside her. The door opened before they reached it. Axel stood in the frame, nodding once before stepping aside to let them pass. The clubhouse was quiet. A dozen iron wolves stood scattered around the room, trying not to stare, trying not to crowd her. They were men who had faced down dangerous situations without flinching. Now they shifted their weight and avoided eye contact like nervous teenagers. Emma stopped in the middle of the room. Her eyes moved from face to face, recognizing each one from the night they sheltered her, from the morning they blocked the road, from the courtroom where they sat in the gallery while a judge thanked them on the record. She found Bear in the corner. He sat alone in the worn armchair near the wood stove, watching her, guarding, waiting, the same way he had watched her since the moment he found her in the snow. She walked toward him. Her steps were slow but steady. The room went silent. She stopped in front of his chair and reached up to the collar of the jacket. She unzipped it carefully and slipped it off her shoulders. She held it out to him with both hands. She said 2 words. "Thank you." Bear took the jacket. The leather was warm from her body. He held it in his hands and looked at her face, at the eyes that had changed since he first saw them. Still watchful, still careful, but there was something new there now, something that had not been there before. Hope. She spoke again. She thanked him for not looking away. She thanked him for stopping when he could have kept riding. She thanked him for asking instead of grabbing. Bear could not speak. 25 years of grief pressed against his chest. 25 years of searching every crowd for a face he would never find. 25 years of wondering if he could have saved his sister if he had just paid attention. He could not bring Lily back. Nothing would ever change that. But he had saved this child. He had seen her in the snow and he had stopped. That mattered. It would always matter. He knelt slowly, bringing himself to her level. He reached into his vest and pulled out a small cloth patch. A wolf, stitched in silver thread on a black background. The kind given to children of members, family of the pack. He held it out to her. He told her she was always welcome there. Always. Emma took the patch. She studied it carefully, turning it over in her hands, tracing the outline of the wolf with her finger. Then she looked up at Bear. She smiled. It was the first real smile anyone had seen from her since her grandmother died. Grace stepped forward gently. She said it was time to go. There would be other visits. But today, they needed to return. Emma nodded. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Bear's neck. He hugged her back carefully, the way you hold something precious and fragile. Then she let go. She walked toward the door, with Grace beside her. The iron wolves watched in silence. At the threshold, Emma stopped. She turned back. She looked at Bear. Her voice was clear and steady. She asked if he would come visit the ranch someday, when she was old enough to run it. The snow had melted months ago. Green grass now covered the hills that rolled across Hollister Ridge Ranch. 12,000 acres of cattle land stretched toward the mountains, alive with the sounds of spring. Calves followed their mothers through the pastures. Horses ran along the fence lines. The creek that cut through the back property flowed clear and cold. Emma stood on the front porch of the main house, watching a line of motorcycles come up the long gravel drive. The rumble of engines reached her before the riders did. She counted them as they appeared around the bend. 5 bikes today. Bear in front, as always. Grace Holloway stepped out of the house and stood beside her. She was a calm woman in her 40s with steady hands and patient eyes. 3 months ago, she had been appointed Emma's permanent foster mother. No hidden motives. No connection to Vincent Gray or Harold Finch. Just a woman who had spent her career helping children and now had the chance to help one in particular. The bikes pulled up near the barn and the engines went quiet. Bear dismounted first. Behind him came Stitch, Axel, Tango, and Dutch. They removed their helmets and hung them on handlebars. They walked toward the porch like men who had done this many times before. Because they had. The court had approved supervised visits. Grace had embraced them. These men had saved Emma's life. They had stood between her and a man who saw her as nothing but a $40 million asset. They had risked prison to buy her time. Grace understood that family was not always about blood. Emma ran down the steps and met Bear halfway across the yard. She hugged him the way she did every time, her arms wrapped tight around his waist, her face pressed against his leather vest. He hugged her back carefully, the way he always did. She pulled away and showed him her backpack. The wolf patch he had given her was sewn to the front. She had added new pins beside it. A horse, a Montana state flag, a small heart. Bear smiled. A real smile. Something that had become easier for him over the past 3 months. Emma was in therapy now. Weekly sessions with a counselor who specialized in childhood trauma. The work was slow, patient. Some days were harder than others. But Emma was learning. Learning that not every adult wanted something from her. Learning that trusting did not always lead to pain. She still wrote letters to the Iron Wolves. Actual paper letters with drawings of horses and motorcycles. She mailed them to the wolf den, and the men read them out loud in the clubhouse like they were sacred documents. Stitch kept everyone in a box behind the bar. The visits had become regular. Barbecues on the ranch. Lessons about motorcycle safety. Even though Emma was years away from riding. Stories about the road, about the club, about the work they did in the community. The Iron Wolves had become something Emma never expected. They had become family. The community had noticed the change. People who once crossed the street to avoid men in leather now waved from their porches. The local newspaper ran a story about the club's charity work. The headline read, "Wolves in Sheep's Country," and featured a photo of Bear teaching children about helmet safety at a school fair. Enrollment in their annual toy drive for foster children doubled. Donations came from people who had never given before. Letters arrived at the clubhouse thanking them for what they had done. Stereotypes do not die easily, but they can crack. One act of courage at a time. Vincent Gray had pleaded guilty to fraud, conspiracy, and attempted child trafficking. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He would be 73 years old before he saw the outside again. Harold Finch received 12 years. His law license was revoked. His assets were seized. The investigation did not stop with them. The pattern Tango had found in the records led to 3 other states. 6 children had been victims of similar schemes. Cases were reopened. New arrests were made. Families who had lost everything learned the truth about what had been taken from them. Something good had come from something terrible. That was not always how the world worked, but sometimes it did. At a community meeting in Millers Creek, parents gathered in the school gymnasium to discuss child safety. A woman stood at the microphone and asked a question. She wanted to know if someone could teach the neighborhood watch about the warning signs Emma had shown, the behaviors that meant a child was running, the looks that meant a child was afraid. Sheriff Linda Reyes stood at the side of the room, arms folded, listening. When the question ended, she stepped forward. She smiled. She told the crowd she knew exactly the right people to ask. In the back of the gymnasium, a man in a leather vest sat quietly in a folding chair. Bear heard his name mentioned. He nodded once and said nothing. Some people build walls. Others build bridges. The Iron Wolves had learned to do both. The community center was full. Folding chairs lined up in neat rows, every seat taken. Parents sat with notebooks in their laps. Teachers leaned against the back wall. A group of bus drivers stood near the door, still wearing their yellow company jackets. Bear stood at the front of the room. No podium, no microphone. Just a man in a leather vest, speaking in a voice that carried without effort. He told them about the blizzard, about the shape in the snow that should not have been there, about a little girl curled against a fence post, arms wrapped around her knees, waiting to die because dying was easier than going back. He did not ask for sympathy. He was not there for himself. He was there to teach. He explained what he saw in Emma that day, the exhaustion that went deeper than tired, the resignation in her eyes when she looked at him, the way she did not run from a stranger on a frozen highway because she had already accepted her fate. A child who runs toward danger is running from something worse. That was the first lesson. He moved through the room as he spoke, making eye contact, watching faces. These were good people, parents who loved their kids, teachers who cared about their students, but they had never been taught what to look for. The system assumed someone else was paying attention. Someone else would notice. Someone else would act. Bear told them there was no someone else. There was only them. He described the signs. Children who were too quiet, too watchful, who tracked every adult in the room like they were waiting for a threat, who flinched at unexpected sounds, who never made eye contact with their own guardians. He talked about the small things. A child who always wore long sleeves in summer. A child who never had lunch money but came from a nice house. A child who apologized constantly for everything, even things that were not their fault. These were not proof of abuse, but they were invitations to ask questions, to pay attention, to say out loud what everyone else pretended not to see. A teacher in the third row raised her hand. She asked what they were supposed to do once they noticed something, who they should call, what happened next. Bear nodded. He had brought Sheriff Reyes for this part. She stepped forward and explained the process. Hotlines, reports, investigations. She made it clear that noticing was not enough. Action was required. But action did not mean confrontation. It meant reporting, documenting, creating a paper trail that could protect a child even when the system moved slowly. The session lasted 2 hours. When it ended, people lingered. They asked questions. They shared stories. Some cried quietly while their spouses held their hands. In the front row, a small figure sat without moving. Emma attended these sessions whenever Grace allowed. She did not speak. She was not ready for that. But she sat where everyone could see her. Visible proof that intervention worked. That one person noticing could change everything. People looked at her differently than they had looked at Bear when he first arrived. They saw a child who had survived. A child who was healing. A child who still had a future because a stranger on a highway decided to stop. The program grew faster than anyone expected. Neighboring counties asked for sessions. Other biker clubs adopted the training and ran their own workshops. Veterans organizations signed on. Church groups invited Bear to speak on Sunday evenings. What started as one man's guilt had become something larger. A movement built on a simple idea. Pay attention. Ask questions. Act. Bear did not pretend this would save everyone. He had learned long ago that the world did not work that way. Some children would fall through the cracks. Some monsters would never be caught. Some grief would never heal. But some children would be saved. Some families would be protected. Some small voice in a classroom would finally be heard because a bus driver remembered what to look for. Some was enough. Some had to be enough. At the end of one session in a small town 40 miles from Miller's Creek, the crowd filed out slowly. Parents shook Bear's hand. Teachers thanked him for his time. A youth pastor promised to bring the training to his congregation. Bear gathered his jacket and prepared to leave. A girl appeared at his side. The motorcycles appeared on the horizon as the morning sun climbed above the mountains. A line of chrome and leather moving along the road that led to Hollister Ridge Ranch. The sound of engines rolled across the valley like distant thunder. Emma stood on the porch, watching them come. 1 year had passed since the blizzard. 1 year since a stranger knelt in front of her in the snow and asked if she wanted to come with him. 1 year since everything changed. She was taller now. Her face had filled out. Her shoulders were straighter. The haunted look that once lived in her eyes had faded, replaced by something steadier. The weight of what she survived would always be there, but so would the light. Grace stood beside her on the porch. The two of them had built something real over the past 12 months. Not a replacement for Margaret. Nothing could replace her grandmother, but something new. A family formed by choice, by patience, by showing up every single day. The motorcycles pulled into the long gravel drive. 20 bikes in formation, engines rumbling, dust rising behind them. They parked in a row near the barn, the same barn where Margaret had taught Emma to saddle her first horse. Bear was at the front of the line. He dismounted slowly and removed his helmet. His eyes moved across the ranch, taking in the land, the fences, the cattle grazing in the distance. This was the place that almost cost a child her freedom. Now it stood as proof of what had been protected. Emma did not walk toward him, she ran. Not the way she had run a year ago. Not desperate, not terrified, not fleeing death. She ran with joy, pure and open and free. Bear caught her as she reached him, lifting her off the ground for just a moment before setting her back down. She grinned up at him. He smiled back. The other iron wolves dismounted and gathered around. Stitch, Axel, Tango, Dutch, the men who had formed a wall on a frozen highway. The men who had voted without hesitation to risk everything for a child they barely knew. Emma led them across the property. She showed them her grandmother's favorite spots. The creek where Margaret taught her to fish when she was 5 years old. The old oak tree where they used to read together on summer afternoons. The hill at the edge of the east pasture where her grandmother would sit and watch the sunset. They climbed the hill together. Emma walked ahead, her boots crunching on the dry grass. Bear followed a few steps behind. The others spread out across the slope, taking in the view. From up here you could see the whole ranch. 12,000 acres of land that the Hollister family had worked for generations. Land that Vincent Gray tried to steal. Land that now belonged to an 8-year-old girl who refused to give up. Emma stopped at the top of the hill. She turned to face Bear and the others. Her expression was serious, steady. She told them she had been thinking about her grandmother, about everything that happened, about the kids who were still out there, trapped in systems that did not protect them, waiting for someone to notice. When she turned 18, she was going to start a foundation, the Margaret Hollister Foundation for Children in Need. It would help kids like her, kids in foster care, kids with guardians who saw them as assets instead of people, kids who had no one paying attention. She had already talked to Grace about it. She had already started writing down ideas in a notebook she kept by her bed. Bear listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. His eyes were wet, but he did not look away. He told her that Margaret would be proud. Emma nodded. She looked out across the ranch, the land her family built, the future she almost lost. She said she knew, and she was going to make sure other kids got futures too. The iron wolves stood on that hill as the sun climbed higher, men in leather and patches, surrounding a little girl who wore their symbol on her backpack. A family built not from blood but from choice, from action, from refusing to look away. The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere below, cattle called to each other across the fields. The world kept turning, the way it always did. But on this hill, something had been planted, a seed of hope that would grow long after this day was over, long after Emma turned 18, long after the iron wolves were gone. Stories like this do not end. They ripple outward. They reach people who need to hear them. They remind us that we all have the power to be the person who notices, the person who stops, the person who does not look away. This story reached you because someone shared it, because someone believed it mattered, and now it lives with you too. Emma walked back down the hill with Bear at her side. The other iron wolves followed. Grace waited on the porch, watching them return. A little girl in boots and a wolf patch, standing on the land her family built, surrounded by people who chose to protect her when no one else would. This is how the world changes. One choice at a time, one child at a time, one person who decides that looking away is not an option. The motorcycles would leave before sunset. The iron wolves would return to their lives, their work, their mission. But they would be back. They always came back. And Emma would be waiting, ready to build something that mattered, ready to honor the grandmother who raised her, ready to prove that even the darkest winters give way to spring. The story ends here, but the work continues. And somewhere out there, another child is waiting for someone to notice. May we all be brave enough to stop, to look, to act. May we all be wolves when the world needs us most.